Hi, everybody. I am Dr. David Perrodin, live from up here on the Jumbotron, but remotely from the North Star recording studio, where it is a brisk 56 degrees at the moment. So I'm going to get out of here and get back inside where it's a little bit warmer. Here we go. All right, welcome to week 6 Fireside Chat of Educational Leadership 655 Pupil Services and Nondiscrimination with Viterbo University. This week kicks off on Monday, February 17th, wraps up on Sunday, February 23rd. School safety, preparedness, crisis management, harassment. Those will be some of the themes we'll be addressing this week. So, announcements. Your learning team paper is due Sunday, February 16th, so make sure at least one member of your learning team uploads it and put all of your names on it. I will return it individually to each of you after I grade it. And there's no wrong way to do that paper, but you want to have rationale for why did we pick ADA or IEP or health plan, and to have that discussion. And if this was to authentically happen in your district, you would need to quickly contact, our food service coordinator, our principal, classroom teachers, and get information about how you're going to best serve that student, Bruce, once he arrives in your district, which could be just a few days from now. So, hopefully it's an experience where you're going to start thinking of all of the bases to cover initially when a student with such high needs, such as Bruce, enters your district. And you can be very successful with that, just making sure we have those discussions ahead of time. There have been wonderful, vibrant discussions post in this class. So thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences and for building upon the experiences of others. We've had terrific discussion threads. Thank you. So week 7, we're in week 6 right now as we enter right into week 6. But for week 7, that will be the final week for discussion questions. So we're almost kind of toward the end of this part of class where we have weekly discussion questions and posting back and forth to each other. And then you enter the research module. And once you're there, you've got several weeks then to work on your final project. So it's not going to be the pace that it's at right now, which is good, right? Because we've been going at a pretty brisk pace, covering a lot of information. But once we get through the next couple of weeks, then things pull back quite a bit. And again, you have a lot of time to assemble that final paper. So let us do a week 5 review. Dun, 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 dun. Week 5 review. All right. You might be saying, what? Yeah, I don't know. All right, here we go. Week 5 review. Terrific discussions on the intersection of the legal case, Plyer versus Doe, and how that interfaces with current ICE operations. Attorney General William Barr's position is that ICE can defy courtroom sanctuary policies, also meaning that ICE would be able to defy city or school district policies or proclamations. So you need to be very clear of your district's position or proclamation regarding ICE operations, or if ICE agents did come to your district. A number of those were shared in class. Proclamations. Is it a proclamation? Is it a board policy? Has your board made the proclamation? Has a building principals made the proclamation? How is that being communicated to families? Because it is right now, it's a frightening time for families to attend school. Because if they're from another country, because they don't know if the ICE agents will be at school, or if on their way to school, on their way back to school. What I want to make clear, though, is if you have a proclamation or if you have a policy saying that your district will not allow an ICE agent on campus, or will not allow an ICE agent to have access to a student. So some of your proclamations had statements kind of similar to that you would refer the agent to the superintendent. But just make sure that whatever statements, whatever proclamations you're putting together, you're very clear on how staff are interpreting those. Because I've talked to a few people who have said, I'm not sure if something happened in the moment, somebody shows up and, it's while students are getting off of a bus or whatever, and they're taking some students aside, some ICE agents, would staff intervene? Would they physically intervene? Would they, between an agent and a student, and what would be the risk for the person to do that? Part of it, this is, you're not going to, for example, litigate things like in the moment. Like if you get pulled over for speeding or something, I mean, that's not the time to go through that process. We want to be very careful. We're not putting something out there, though, where staff are interpreting that they're authorized to almost do any measure to not allow this to happen. And I'm not sure that that's clearly communicated. I've talked to staff in many districts. I've talked to administrators, and they said, I'm not sure. So again, have these conversations. And the other part is Plyer versus Doe. Okay, Plyer versus Doe was the legal court case, which made it null, right? Whether a student was documented or undocumented, whether they be served by the school district. So that's the premise of what you're coming back to when you're saying we're educating all students have a right to be in our school. So I think that's a lot different than saying, this is just the ethical, it's the right thing to do, which is all true, but also you have a court case that says this is the way that, schools are supposed to function when it comes to students enrolling in schools, serving all students. And, Plyer versus Doe, that environment at the time wasn't too dissimilar to what's happening right now. And that's why Plyer versus Doe, came about. So, but know that legislation. You might want to share that with your staff, as an administrator. I think there's a lot to be learned from it. And then also look at any statements, any proclamations that you have. Now, of course, as a Pupil Services Director, this is a Pupil Services Nondiscrimination course. Non-discrimination is central to what you do. And that's why this was discussed during the past week. Week 6, reflective teaching annotation. Litigation. Dun, 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 dun. Whoa. Litigation. All right. Litigation happens in schools. Now, we can't, anybody can be sued for anything, right? But we want to make sure that as Pupil Services Directors and Special Education Directors, we are doing our due diligence to lessen opportunities of liability for us or for the district, or that anything catastrophic could happen to the students that we care for. So again, this is work that I do as an expert witness, and I'm going to share some of that right now, some of these points. And then actually in week 7, I have an article that was published in a journal that'll give more guidance. I didn't want to put it in this week because we already have a lot for this week. So the first thing is documentation. Make sure you're documenting your decisions. We already talked about documenting your professional development. How are we educating students with disabilities about harassment, about bullying, about threats, how to report those threats? So we want to have that down. We also want to make sure, so there's something called a non-disclosure agreement. It's probably in your contract. And that means that, certain things that are generated at district level, certain district operations procedures, you can't share with other people. And then also, if you leave the district, you can't take that stuff with you and then implement it in another district. And it's very common in the business world too. Like you can't leave a business and take all the business's clients with you. But the thing is, you have to understand how these NDAs work and also how they might interfere with your ability to document the things that you're doing. So, for example, if all of your start of year in-service training that you've overseen for pupil services and non-discrimination, anything to that nature, I would recommend keeping a copy of that for yourself. Okay. And the reason is, litigation not only happens when you're with a district, but it happens later on. And it might be something that happened when you were with the district. Now you're somewhere else. You don't have access to these documents. So you want to keep those documents. Now, this is a fine line, right? I'm not giving legal advice, and this is something maybe you want to bring up to a school attorney or get a consult with this. Actually, I've asked attorneys to come on my podcast and have this discussion, and they've all said, no, I don't want to be the one that takes a position on this. But, because I see it from an expert witness side, I observe people who get brought in for depositions, and they're like, I think I did that. I think I this is what I included in the professional development. I think this is the discussion I had with people. But then they can't say when they had it. They don't have notes from it. They don't have records. And if the records were, in the school, did the school keep those, or are they no longer there? So this person doesn't have documentation. So I just want to make that clear. I'm a big advocate for keeping a lot of documentation of the work that I've done, and keeping that probably independent of the school district, not necessarily sharing it with other people. Then I think you get into an issue of non-disclosure violation. But I think if it's for your own, now listen, there's going to be people out there who tell you absolutely don't do that, probably. So I think you need to be informed from a legal counsel, or informed from your professional organizations on this. But just take the situation though, where what if you left a district and you were a year or two away, and then there was some claim that came up, some bullying or harassment incident while you were the director, and maybe you were part of responding to that at the time, but you're gone. You don't have those files, those records. You don't know what was done for professional development. And those will all be questions a lawyer will ask you under a deposition. So then it's kind of like, I think I did this. I think we did that. I think I did that. And you want to have that as rock solid as you can. So let me talk about two terms. The first is discovery. So discovery is basically looking for all of the documents. A lawyer might say, I want all the documents regarding professional development that occurred in these 2 years. I want all of the emails to staff regarding professional development. So all of those things need to be provided, policies, handbooks, stuff like that. That's discovery. Deposition, that's when legal counsel is interviewing, and that's outside of a courtroom. That's usually like at a law office, but you can be subpoenaed, and then you need to come in, and legal counsel then would ask you questions. And those are usually very long, so that's the point where, usually you have discovery first, and you have depositions second. I guess depositions technically are kind of part of discovery, but just so you're aware of those two type of things. And this is where we come back to those early discussions of discretion, how you handle things, how you do things in a district. If you have a lot of site-based discretion, you have a lot of discretion afforded to you, you probably take less notes, you probably make fewer records. But just know that, that then becomes a liability for you in the event of any type of litigation, because you don't have that data, you don't have those records available to you because they were never created in the first place. So here's the thing. I always tell people, and I see this time and time again in expert witness work, act in the best interest of the student. So it's pretty simple, right? You're acting in the best interest of the student, or I guess staff member or whoever, but usually it's student. And that's the big thing, where you acting, where your decisions in the best interest of the student. So were you applying your professional discretion, to do that? So we talked about creating a paper trail. Know your job description, right? Because that's something else. It's part of discovery. They'll always get a job description, and they'll say, these were parts of your job, and tell me how you fulfilled these parts. Or someone say, I didn't know that's part of my job. Well, it is, once you have the job description, it's your responsibility to know that. You can always say, I asked for clarification on these parts of my job, or, I contacted administration with specific maybe concerns about the resources allocated to these things, but otherwise people sometimes get presented a a job description, and it's like, I have no idea I was supposed to do all of these things, or I was responsible for that. So litigation also in schools usually takes two forms. So this is where, also if you're considering how, with your insurance carrier, your own insurance carrier, some type of liability, but this usually it's if the plaintiff is litigating against the district because of something, let's say it's harassment, bullying, they're going to litigate against the district as a whole, and they're probably going to litigate against individuals, maybe a principal, pupil services director, teacher, counselor, whoever, that were a part of this overall, incident or event or whatever it was. So that's where you want to, again, make sure that you have your documentation of what you've done. And I'm not telling you to keep privileged, confidential information, but again, I think there's ways to do things of indicating, that you're fulfilling the obligations of your job under your job description. Also, a couple terms to know. One is standard of care. So standard of care basically is, a judge or a jury would say, this, okay, so you're a pupil services director. How would a pupil services director have handled this issue of, like, let's say IEPs being, out of compliance, that they're not up to date. They've become aware of that. How might a pupil services director typically respond to that? What would be a plan of action to get IEPs compliant? Did this, and then the question, usually like from an expert witness, is, did the pupil services director then act in typical alignment to what the standard of care would be for a pupil services director who just found out the IEPs are non-compliant? And then there's another part, and that's reckless. And reckless, these are all different legal definitions, but reckless is knowing, for example, I knew the allergy plans weren't updated. People had brought that up to me, but I didn't intervene to, make sure that the plans got updated, or, make sure that new staff, we had a training, process in place for new staff for students with allergies. So it's like you're aware of this, you've known about this. You can prove that people knew about this, and then they didn't act. They disregarded it. Disregard is actually part of reckless. So just so you're aware, not to freak you out, because these things are rare. The biggest thing, again, document, keep data, and act in the best interest of the student. It's actually a legal term. It's a legal term, acting in the best interest of the student. Explicitly, okay, this is from our teaching annotation, explicitly describe the code of conduct to all students, including students with disabilities. We've seen in the news right now, Middleton Cross Plains Area School District, the Department of Justice is investigating a large number of students because of the sharing of nude photos. So ultimately, somehow from that, the questions will come up of how are students educated about the risk of sharing these, what was done for preventive measures, and then how are students with disabilities, if there are students with disabilities who are either sending or receiving these, how were they educated about this and the reporting systems and things like that. These are all questions that'll come out of this. So school crisis planning, there's two sides to school crisis planning. One is the discussion side, and one is operations. So discussion is a webinar. It's a tabletop exercise, with your administration, or, it can be going to a conference. That's all discussion side. Like you listening to this right now, that's discussion side. Operation side is when you actually do drills or exercises. So when people are actually moving around, fire drill, people are leaving the building, that's the exercise side. And what's happening right now is people are putting more time on this exercise side over here and less time on the discussion side. And you need to balance it out. A lot can be done with discussion. I went to a district about 10 years ago, and it was amazing. The superintendent would come into administrative team meetings periodically, and he'd have an article that he, got from Google Alert or whatever. And it would be some school safety incident that happened somewhere. And then he would present it, be a little summary. Of course, you only have so much information with that. But then the question would be, how would we handle that if it happened here? And it could, whatever it was, a power outage, or it was a non-custodial, parent that, was on campus and the student went home with them or something like that, or, whatever. But it was fascinating how effective that was, because he would go through and they would look at go online. What policies do we have with this? How are we training people about this? And it was maybe like 10, 15 minutes. It wasn't this huge thing, but because it was done on a regular basis, because he documented also that he was doing this, it was very powerful for the school board. It was in the moment professional development. It was relevant. So, last week, the NEA, AFT, American Federation for Teachers, Everytown, they released a joint proclamation calling for an end to school intruder drills as they are now, like hyperrealistic, asking to rethink these. So that's powerful. Like that's going to have a massive impact on intruder drills, and I think in a very good way. I think we've gone way over the side for hyperrealism, and I know that also from the litigation side. I know that from working with parents all around the country who have children after very intense hyperrealistic drills, especially young kids. Young kids have a hard time telling what's real, what's not real, not even going back to school. A family who, their two kids, they contacted me 2 years ago. Their two kids, elementary kids, both have autism. There was a very hyperrealistic intruder drill conducted at their school. When the kids came home from that was the last day they ever attended public school. The next morning they got up, the kids were fighting with their parents. They didn't want to go to school. They absolutely refused. The parents found out, what happened with this drill, the impact on their kids. There was a lot of counseling involved, trying to bring the kids back to a school setting. The kids would get violent, throw up in the car. It was horrible. So then they tried another school, open enrolled to another school. That didn't work. And they eventually did an online school. And that's where they're at right now, 2 years later. They don't know how they're going to get their kids, if they'll ever get them back into a brick and mortar school building. So it's really devastating, right? So a few things, like if you're ever part of a drill or exercise and they're saying, here, you have to sign this release to participate in this, absolutely don't sign it. Like, that's a bad drill. We should not have drills where there's a likelihood that people are going to be injured. So there's such a thing called Institutional Review Board. There's a thing in 1976, the Belmont Report, if you ever want to look at it, basically saying, like in research, you do no harm to people. We have to have, we have to design things so we're not going to injure people. But yeah, that's a red flag. That's a no. And so on Friday, I wrote an article for Phi Delta Kappan Journal about the concept of applying IRB Institutional Review Board to K-12 school safety drills. So I've written before for Kappan, and I contacted the editor and said, hey, this just came out from the two biggest teachers unions about school drills. I think I have a solution to it. I've had it for a while. IRB, let me write an article. So that'll be coming out. Hopefully, if it's published before the end of class, I'll share it with you. If not, maybe I'll share it in a non-published format, because I think this is going to be very relevant and very useful to you going forward, especially when you're in a district and you're having discussions about ethically providing safety instruction to students with disabilities. Identifying the school's role in an investigation that involves the police. So understand how the school functions and how police function. Let's say we have a student who served under an IEP. That student then has a controlled substance at school, maybe is trying to sell that controlled substance at school. Police are involved. How does the investigation work between the school and police? What does it mean that the student has a disability? How do you inform a manifestation hearing? Where do you get information from? Are you able to get it from the police or the police report? Do the parents need to be contacted? So again, these are discussions to have now with your administration, or maybe even an administration might say, I don't know, we need to pass this forward and call our school attorney and get some guidance on this, because it's much better to think about it now than to think about it 10 minutes after something actually happens. Remember that volunteers are not licensed educators, so they're awesome, wonderful people, right? We do our background checks on everybody now. But it's one thing to, have students read to volunteers and the practice of reading skills, and completely different to say, here, I need you to present whatever to this group of students as like the first time the instruction is being presented to them. It doesn't happen a lot, but it happens more often than not when it's hard to find substitute teachers, and especially in rural areas. Again, where we have some teaching positions open, and it kind of seems right. Maybe, this is better. This person, even though they're a volunteer, they're really good with the kids. But we need to know also, we're not paying that person. We're not putting them in the role of an educator. Just to make that clear. I actually saw that play out once, where there was a volunteer, and the volunteer was assigned 2 students to chaperone on a field trip, and the students had significant disabilities, and this volunteer didn't know these 2 students, was familiar with the school but didn't know the students. And also one of the students had a food allergy, and there was an EpiPen that they gave this person, here's a medical bag and there's an EpiPen. And they were never very far away from other people, but it's not like they had a 2-way radio, and it's like, oh my goodness, like that completely shouldn't have done that. Like that should have been one of your staff members assigned to those, students, especially with the student with the medical need. But again, sometimes these things just seem right. It seems like this person, they're competent, they get along, well with the kids. This allows our system to work in whatever way, but you got to think through that and process, and make sure you're not putting people into roles that they shouldn't be in. Be careful on how you allocate resources to trend issues. So a couple of years ago, when I was teaching this class, and the Tide Pod Challenge was all the rage, and one of the students in the class was talking about how her district, which is a pretty large district, was holding evening sessions for parents, special counseling sessions, and putting materials together, training about the Tide Pod Challenge. And what she was saying was, there were other things that were happening, opioid abuse, for example, increasing, and they were basically having to siphon resources from these things that they had identified as crucial goals for the year for the district, that they felt to address this Tide Pod Challenge. And of course, you have to address it, you have to become aware of it, but it was a phase, like it went through, and then there was something else that happened. And if you get into this mode of responding to everything, right, all of these things with polling your resources, and we're going to have parent meetings, and we need to do presentations and all of that, then you're perpetually be in that mode. Okay, always firefighting. One call to another, and then your long-term district objectives are just going to be in shambles because of that. You're not going to have the time and consistency to put into that. So just know when things like this happen, to bring awareness to it. But we can't pull all of our resources and apply them to these things which are kind of trendy. All right. Week 6 preview. Hey, this is big emphasis on school safety this week. I've got a couple of videos I presented on PBS TV in 2013 and 2019. So yeah, we're going to do, and we're also going to do that. So those are very helpful. They're very different. So 2013 was more centered on the risk of profiling students, because at that time, people were coming out and saying, hey, we have an assessment where we can go through schools and we can identify the 15% of kids that we think could be school assailants. That doesn't exist. That type of assessment doesn't exist, and it ends up profiling. And usually students, emotional behavioral disabilities, sometimes students with autism get profiled. students who are into goth, stuff like that. But it was a big issue, and I had huge response from parents across the nation, positively saying, "Yeah, this is happening in our school in New Hampshire or in Nevada, where they're attempting to do this profile." And again, the science for that just doesn't exist. I also put up a map of Wisconsin, county by county, and it was actually divided county by intra-county. It's kind of a neat map in that 2013 presentation to show the percentage of non-English language speakers as a first language. Basically, and we've kind of already talked about it in this class, making sure that we have materials accessible, especially safety materials. If something were to happen where students need to be evacuated from school or stay in a school, how are we making sure that all of our parents have access to that information, and not just the parents who are English speaking? So in 2019, I did another presentation. It was the 3rd of July. It was extremely heavy downpour outside. I remember that because when I came outside, it was almost like a lake at the university. It's where the studio is, down at UW-Madison. But anyway, spent a lot of time on fortifications and $3 billion for school safety industry. Most of that goes toward buying devices and equipment. And the deal is, a lot of this stuff has never been tested on end users, especially students with disabilities. And schools buy these things. So whether it be bollards, special locks for doors, stuff like that. I worked at the Wisconsin School for the Blind. And there was a vendor came in who was selling a school safety app. And one of the high school students was to try it out. And she's going through it. And then she said, okay, like, how do I get the voiceover? And the vendor said, whoa. Let me, okay, here, we can make the text larger. Okay, now you can read it. She's like, I'm blind. I can't read this, right? I'm blind. I need voiceover. And they're like, it doesn't do that. Okay, well, it should have, right? Because it's universal design. We know that when we build things, especially for end users who are going to be students, we need voiceover and other features. But the reality is there's no legislation. There's no underwriter laboratory. You can build anything. You can sell anything, and especially apps. So just understand that, because you're probably going to be part of that discussion in your school. You need to represent your students with disabilities, your students who are English language learners, and make sure that you're not, something isn't being bought that has never been tested or has had the input of those end users. So the two reasons why this spending spree is happening in school safety: customer perceived value. Customer perceived value is, if there's any chance that this could make us safer, we'll buy it. We've seen most school referendums now, they're told overtly to put the word safety in, that this will increase safety. We're putting in these new windows, which we should have done anyway. They were 35 years old and frames are falling out. But if you put safety on, people are voting for it. Customer perceived value. And the second is social proof. Once one district does it, the others around are typically going to follow suit. So those are two big terms. I'm actually writing a paper, an article for Crisis Response Journal on customer perceived value and social proof. Just so powerful. So I also talked in 2019 at the end of the presentation. I talk about Bart Barta. He is a police officer. He trains SROs and law enforcement agencies and first responders or emergency responders, all states. He's been in Wisconsin, on how to successfully interact with students with disabilities, especially students with autism, when you're coming into a school, whether it be medical emergency, whether it be intruder situation, whatever. That's awesome. We should all be doing that for schools. We should have something in place like that. Week 5 shout-outs. Angie, you wrote about a principal who directed the special education case managers to write minutes for skills training for a mental health professional, and that was an attempt to keep that person funded. So those type of things happen, and we've got to be vigilant for that, and making sure when we have IP meetings too, and we have outside providers showing up. Many times outside providers, when I've been at IP meetings, have asked to be put in the IP. Put me in for, start of year training, 5 hours or whatever. And then if the district does that, there's usually this big invoice and you don't know what they're presenting. And you just have to be very careful of that. And you have the pressure of the parent there at the meeting. I also had, a professional health, mental health professional who wanted to, provide all of these workshops for staff and have staff go on site and things like to see how things were done at this offsite location. I'm not saying you have to consider all of these things, but you're writing what level of training is needed. What is needed for staff at the start of the year, to best, meet the needs of the student. What's the training we need to do? Not who is going to necessarily do the training. And also any questions on that, talk with your business manager. They put together the contracts with outside agencies. But, these are complicated things and they're usually pretty emotional in the moment, when there's an outside provider, parents at the meeting, whatever, and the provider says, hey, I can provide this. But, in Angie, the case you provided was a principal saying, well, here's a way we can keep this person in district. And I get it, right? Because we're understaffed and we want to keep people, especially if we feel they're adding value to our system. But, these types of things aren't ethical and it's just not the way to go. Ryan, you wrote this week, some things that were sticking out for you. It was how to work with transgender students who want to participate in sports under the gender that they identify as. So actually, I've seen this Wisconsin schools be very proactive, very successful in this. In tiny schools, of like 100 kids, K-12 and larger schools. What administrators share with me, what communities share with me, is it's more community education because this is new. This is so people need to understand. Be made aware of how this works. So that's educating a school board. Remember, boards turn over, people vote on boards, and they usually calibrate back to when they were in school. This is what it was like when I was in school for all of these things. And they need to understand this is, where we're at right now. And then, we're acting in the best interests of the student, we're being inclusive. Now, one of the things though, that, your athletic director, will help you understand this is the WIAA, the monitoring for students who, for example, transgender students, if a student is a male student identifying as a female, wanting to participate in a female sport, how does hormone therapy work? Look at the WIA guidance on that. And the monitoring for that really falls back to the district. It's not the WIA that's monitoring, it's on the district. And in the superintendent class I had in fall, we had a really vibrant discussion of, what if a student said, I don't want to do hormone therapy? Like, I don't know if that's safe for my body. And do I really have to go through this invasive process to, prove, or what is it that, I do identify, as a non-biological, if I'm a biological male, I'm identifying as a female. And so it was a really great discussion because, you could be in a situation where you're supporting the student, right? But the WI might say the student can't be on the game, or if you play the game, it's not going to count as it would be a forfeit or something like that. I don't know. I don't want to get too far down the road on that, but this is where ultimately we come back to, in the best interests of your students, and having these discussions with your athletic director. So they're having their discussions with their athletic director group. So you have this knowledge ahead of time, and again, not 10 minutes after something is introduced to you. So good question. Danielle, you wrote, we worked really hard to try to find him Special Olympics as well as clubs he could participate in, but helping his parents see the value, and that was really tough. So you're talking about a student with a disability. Parents wanted the student to participate, for example, in cut criteria activities, and simply by having that student there, what were they getting from that? What were they benefiting from that? How much were they interacting versus maybe some other activities? Certainly it's tough. It is tough. Been there too, where parents absolutely convinced that anything less of their child participating in, on a basketball team, student with a disability, or some other team that had a cut criteria, they had a hard time handling that. And the problem, obviously, is that's a parent perspective. They're not trying to take the student perspective on that, of how much is a student engaging it, what is the student, are they enjoying, what they're participating in. So I actually had a situation years ago when I was a speech language therapist in a school many years ago. Family of a high school boy with autism and some other comorbid mental health condition. He lived next to a bowling alley, and the bowling alley would let him bowl whenever he wanted for free because smaller town and, a lot of lanes. So the kid got bowling down. He was like a 230 average. He just had it. He was really good. And so the parents wanted him to be on, the high school baseball team. They wanted, football, things like this. And they're saying, we can't do it. For the high school varsity football team, it wasn't safe. He didn't recognize, when to protect his body, when to how to stay safe on a field. They couldn't do it. And so, but anyway, the parents, the school athletic director, special education director, talked about Special Olympics. Hey, they have bowling, and the parents reluctantly agreed to it because, they thought this was a lesser experience for their son. And he had a blast. I was participating, supporting the Special Olympics team at that time. And he had a terrific time. He won. When we got back to town, I was just done being a firefighter at that time. I still had my red light. And I talked to the one police officer in town, and I said, is it okay if we do a little mini parade around town and then we stop at the kid's home? Again, this is a lot of years ago, right? And he's like, oh, yeah. So we did this little parade with the red light, and the windows are down, and we're honking the horn, and it was just really cool. But that I remember afterwards talking with the parents, and they're like, we never really gave this a chance for him to do Special Olympics, and even maybe other bowling activities. Bowling wasn't a school sport at that time. I don't think it is now, but in that school. But it was amazing. It was amazing. Tim, you wrote, our district hosts several events throughout the year that highlight different cultures: Japan Fest, Black History Month celebration, multicultural fair, a few other things. So awesome. Talking about, bringing awareness to the district. So the key point here is you are in your community is doing that within community, within district. And too many times we have this philosophy that we're going to send people away to have them learn about diversity. So we're going to send them to a conference in Wisconsin Dells or whatever, and then they'll come back with this knowledge instead of looking to our own community, looking to our own school. So great example. Jennifer, you wrote, our evenings together included family dinner, craft project, parent support group, child support group, cooking a meal. Food was fabulous. Talking about English language parents. And so basically how to increase opportunities for them to be part of the school community. When I was, again, my experiences early on, families and schools together fast. So it was terrific, right? Families would come in, and these were families where might have students who are truant, maybe other kind of frictional relationship with the district. And we would do things together. One of them was always to make a meal. And I remember this big spaghetti meal we made, all the spaghetti, and it was awesome though. It was really good. And then we started to see objective markers change from that. We started to see students attending school more, academics. Parents were reporting out a more positive relationship with the school during, challenging times, and also, of course, during times that weren't challenging, and principals were reporting the same thing. So the big thing of that community building through like a common shared activity such as preparing a meal. Really awesome. Jessica, here's our last shout out. Jessica, you wrote secretaries put data into Wise Dash and then they create help tickets because no one educates them on how to report EL services on the multiple state federal reports that districts have to complete. Absolutely. Absolutely. And not only that, so the data for a lot of stuff is a mess. Okay. I talked about this in a few podcasts early on, but secretaries aren't trained on this. There's turnover in positions. These are pretty complex systems. The other part is we assume that there is some kind of process on the other side, whether it be the state level. All right, there we go. State level. That needs to go. Whether it be the state level or feds, that if we put in data and it's not right, I submitted this, I'm not sure, but apparently it went through and it's accepted, so we're good. Good. But the deal is there aren't scrubbers on the other side, which is little things built into the data that say, hey, last year you had 200 students in your district identified as English language getting EL services, and now you have 2, or you have how that can't be right? You didn't go from 200 to 2. You think someone would pick up the phone and contact you and say, hey, you submitted this, and like statistically, this is impossible virtually. Can you look at it again? Do you have questions? But that doesn't happen. That's not built into these systems. I've looked at these systems in depth, and a lot of these systems don't have that, that type of red flag, or even that it kicks out to a person at the state or a federal level, and then that person, looks at this and says, yeah, I don't think so. So then you get into the school year, and it's like, we didn't get the funding we were supposed to get, or whatever, or you find out, oh my goodness, like this was wrong, but 6 months later. So look at the data, as you said, the help tickets. It's good too to encourage your secretaries, whoever's submitting that, to get together with some other secretaries or administrative assistants in the area to make sure they all kind of are on the same page with that. I did that. I always made sure. Go over and see what they're doing in this other district, or let's all get together. Like, we'll invite them here. We'll do lunch. We'll bring up the stuff like on the screen, so we're all kind of on the same page. Or are there little shortcuts to do to make this like more efficient? Really worth the time to do. So, hey, everybody, I appreciate your time for these fireside chats. I know you're incredibly busy. And, for this week's videos, you can watch those. I think you can actually watch them in a little faster speed. But those also are terrific professional development tools. I get contacted. People say, hey, we use this in our school district in, Nebraska or Washington State. And then we had learning objectives, or we had discussions after. I'm like, yeah, that's great. All right. No cost, quality professional development. But thank you so much for your participation. Week 6, week 7, there isn't nearly as much as there is in week 6. And then after that, you're into your research module. We're kind of in the home stretch. All right. You can tell it's cold down here. It's cold. All right. Take care, everybody.